welcome to my talk on maintainable tests while maintaining Sanity. This is about the situation you face when you are busy shipping your code, but in the pipelines of your CI/CD, you see errors regarding unit tests, that they are failing because services are missing, or for example that bindings are not known for specific components selectors you use in the template of the component you test. So this is your personal aid kit. The idea is that unit tests in general, they have, my impression, have this negative connotation actually, because often they are what gets in our way on our happy shipping path on Friday afternoons and evenings, and is not what we actually want to deal with when we are thinking about fixing bugs for our customers or having our managers in our backs. So I hope I can provide you with an aid kit, and that will help you to fix these bugs in unit tests quicker. So about me, I'm not that guy from the previous slide. My name is Niklaas. I work on one of the biggest Angular applications. I'm a front-end engineer at ClickUp. We strive to create an environment that nurtures good programming practices and robust code. I love functional programming, NGRX, RxJS, and maybe you know it also, Rx Angular. And I love writing solid, self-explicable, and well-tested code. A former colleague of mine once said that a good software developer is a teammate that you can fire easily, simply because you don't need them to understand the code they wrote. What I don't like is when there are no tests for a component. In my opinion, in general, we should strive to provide a spec file for each component, even if that file is just for testing that the component creates. So I don't like it when I see a component that doesn't have an associated spec file at all. It makes me grumpy when I see deactivated tests or commented tests, because this feels like losing a treasure that we as a team once had found or built. But what makes me really annoyed is when I myself try to ship some code and tests are failing. You know that situation. I find this super annoying because this makes me reason with others why they have deactivated and commented tests, and I want to do it on my own, but I actually know I shouldn't. So I can feel the pain that others felt and simultaneously know that we should and could do all better. So this talk gives some practical advice on how we can avoid these situations, how we can easily get code shipped and not getting troubled with unit tests failing. I figured that often the error messages I get are quite similar, and they could be simply prevented by mocking the dependencies of the component where it changes properly. You probably cannot build up an entire test suite on Friday evenings, but what you can do is at least maintain the status quo and improve it by 1%. So we will split this up in 3 levels. The first one helps you getting your spec files to run in 80% of the cases you encounter. The second level is about half of that remaining 20% of the cases. And the third level is about resources that help you writing code in such a way that you can test it more easily. So you most probably will never encounter the last 10%. This is the Hello World example. This is actually what a vanilla spec file should look like. Wait for async is quite new. Look it up. It's quite helpful. It makes sure that anything asynchronously is waited for. We declare the fixture and the component in lines 5 and 6, and configure the test bed, the testing module in the before each. So what is also important is that you detect the changes. This is running the change detection on the component that you compile within the testbed once. So ng-init is run, and you finally write a test that checks whether you create the component. What I haven't talked about yet, but is like the main aspect of this talk is how do I configure the testing module properly. I've seen fellow developers struggling with this sometimes. The thing is, actually, it's very similar to ng module. So once you know ng module, you know the testbed. The testbed is the test harness within which the component under test is compiled. And you can imagine it as a bounded context that we can use to make sure that nothing unnecessary interferes with our test cases. So maybe this might be obvious to a lot of you, but you define this bounded context, the testbed, the testing module, in a very similar way to how you define an Angular module. Declarations is for everything that goes into Angular templates. Providers is for everything the dependency injector takes care of. Then there's imports to, this is in this particular case for testing modules, you can use it to import other testing modules that provide mocks. And seeing it from that perspective, it actually looks quite familiar. I highly recommend mocking everything you can, because this will prevent these error messages that you encounter. And because this is the only way we can really use the power of the test harness and create a test environment free from other effects outside of the component under test. And you will notice more and more of the annoying error messages will be gone when you mock everything. So what do you do in case of an emergency? I would really like you to do this step by step, because things can get quite chaotic on Friday evenings. And when things are getting more complicated, you will probably need to think about these grayish points on the right, but in most of the cases, you should already do much better applying the left ones. This is about staying clear-headed. What you should do is make yourself aware of what your component under test is. Like check out where is that error message actually coming from, and make sure that in that spec file that component is in declarations. Then you should check the constructor of that component. And what I do is, like each of the dependencies there, I will mock in the providers array of the testing module. And what I usually do is adding one after the other and running the test again. So I can see how less and less error messages come up. Most probably this will also will already help you in getting that spec file running, but it could be that you also need the third bullet point here. It is about mocking what is in the Angular template, directives, components, pipes, and these you should mock in the declarations. So the grayish points are about sometimes there's things called in the constructor, and you might need to mock them too. Just take a look at it, and also in ng-init. But usually applying these steps 1 to 3 should suffice, and there shouldn't be any errors anymore. The question now is, how do you mock? So again, mocking makes sure that we are only testing what we want to test, the component under test, and nothing more. And a lot of error messages I have seen are due to the fact that we didn't provide mocks. We should have provided. There is this great library called ng-mocks. It helps you mocking kind of everything. It has plural and singular forms of mock declarations, and mock providers, and these you can use to mock. These examples here that I show are in a GitHub repository that I referred to on my last slide. So this is just to give you a context of how, or an example of how it could be used. You see I'm mocking here some component, some pipe, and some directive with mock declarations, and mock some service with mock providers. There's also mock module, but what I prefer doing is mocking each declaration or provider within a module that I depend on separately. So I don't use that one very often. But I wanted to list it here so you know that it exists. So this was actually all about the happy path. You now have an aid kit you can use when you are in trouble, that you can mock, and you know how you can mock declarations and providers. So, but as you know, on Friday evenings in the office, sometimes paths aren't happy and you just want to get that pipeline running. So on this level, I will show you some examples of pitfalls or like this more difficult issues to find when you're struggling trying to get your spec files running. So sometimes you have in the component decorator you have a service provided, and this one you cannot mock in the provider's property that you are passing to configure testing module. In such a case, this example is about some component provided service. You can see in line 5 on the left, it's provided in the component decorator. What you would need is lines 10 to 14 on the right side. You override the component and set the providers to mock of that service. I've encountered this several times. You struggle getting a spec file running. You think you have already mocked everything, but actually you haven't. Take a look at the providers array that is potentially defined in the component decorator and mock what you can find there with the approach I show here. In general, you should always remember that we are sitting on the shoulders of giants. Most probably someone else has already thought about you testing a component that relies on their library. And especially within the Angular ecosystem itself, you will find testing modules that you can add to the imports array when configuring the testbed. So for example, when your component uses a router, the Angular router, it makes sense to add HTTP to use a router testing module and add it to the imports array of the testbed you configure. And there's other examples. These are just like the ones I usually see that are missing. In the end, it's always worth reading the lovely manual of these libraries, and they explain you how you should write test files when you are building upon that work. Another special occasion is observables and marble testing. This is something, could be an entire talk on its own, but I just want to mention it here and also give you some advice on that should make your life easier dealing with observables in your tests. So let's take a look at it, and shouldn't be scared. In the end, what you often see is failures such as this one. When running a unit test, it says cannot read properties of undefined reading pipe, or sometimes it's reading subscribe. yeah, in most of the cases, this is about a dependency that offers an observable as property, and you pipe and or subscribe to this property. You can see this on the right side. So while ngmux does a very good job at overriding methods with empty implementations, in this case, we need a bit of extra work. And what you can use is empty. Empty is part of RxJS. And we help ngmux in this case in line 7. We note that we use the singular version, mock provider. We mock that service that has that tick property we subscribe to in the ng init. And what we do here is using empty as mock. Empty, it just is an observable that just emits complete and does nothing else. Yeah. So as you can see on the previous slide, we subscribed here to that property that caused the failure because it's undefined, and what we simply do here is defining it with empty, being an observable but doing nothing. Most probably this doesn't make a good test case, but what it does do is it gets your spec file running. And I think it's at least you kind of improved. You improved what the spec file that is already there, and you can still think about a proper test case maybe the week after you successfully shipped the feature you just wrote. There's one more thing I would like to talk about because I've seen this often, and I think it's an anti-pattern. There are most examples I see where of people configuring a test module. They have like this no error schema or custom element schema in it. What this does is it allows any kind of declaration in the template of the component under test. But the thing is, when you use it, you are no longer testing whether you are using the API of your child components properly. So I highly recommend avoiding it because this allows you to verify that API. When you're avoiding it, then your tests will fail when an input or an output binding changes of the child component. So what I rather recommend is using mock components and mocking the declaration specifically, because in that case, let's say your child component, an input or output binding is renamed, and you're using that, it's a child component, you use it in your component under test, you would get a test failure, so you notice that something has changed. Using custom element schema or no error schema, you wouldn't notice that. So I highly recommend avoiding that one. So this is now about level 3. In level 3, I just want to give you some further resources that you can take a look at. I recommend, of course, reading the lovely manual of libraries you use, such as the one from Angular. And especially the part about how to test an Angular application is super helpful. There's also these other talks. I've linked them in the presentation. The presentation you will also find in the GitHub repository, or you can just Google them. It's about, actually not specifically about Angular testing, but how to write tests in general. And super helpful, helped me a lot. And there's also the Pragmatic Programmer, the book by Hunt and Thomas, that I love because it helps me, has often helped me making pragmatic decisions when writing both code, features, and also tests for these features. So what I hope is I gave you some advice on how to avoid commenting out test cases, removing spec files, and you are now equipped with some tooling, a step-by-step guide on how to get your code shipped on Friday evenings, although tests are failing. If you have any further questions, feel free to contact me. I hope you enjoy the rest of EnterpriseNG, and I'm looking forward to discussing this talk with you soon. So take care and have a nice day.
Hi, I'm Joe Weems. Thanks for checking out this video from EnterpriseNG 2021. Online conferences were great, but it's time to get back in person. See your old friends, make some new ones, and take your career to the next level. Head over to ng-conf.org to get your ticket. See you there.